Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives. And in case either of you are watching this, Kiki, Grin, I hope you both have been having a happy birthday today. Anyway, today we shall be discussing episodes 37 and 38 of Steven Universe, Warp Tour, and The Test. And as per usual, let's talk about the odd-numbered episode first. In this case, what happens in this episode is, it actually starts with the Gems finishing up a mission in what looks like a field, so to speak, a field of flowers, and pretty much it seems to be a job well done. Everything's all good, and really the only major detriment is that Steven seems to be suffering from allergies due to all the flowers. As such, Steven is just kind of sneezing. He's got tears in his eyes. His nose is full of snot, and as such, as he and the Gems go back to the warp pad and warp away, well, he's just kind of gross. And as the group are warping, Steven ends up sneezing so hard that it kind of causes him to fly away. Because when you're in warp, you're essentially in, I want to say, free fall, so to speak. You're just pretty much just no gravity as you go wherever the warp takes you. But Steven ends up sneezing so hard, it ends up kind of causing him to float a little bit to his head. Actually ends up sticking out of the little warp tube or light or whatever that the Gems are in, allowing him to essentially see the space that the warps end up traveling through in order to get their passengers from place to place. However, as he looks outside, he sees another warp light, and in said warp light, he sees something using it. However, before he can get a good look at it, he's pulled back into the warp and warned that it's kind of dangerous to leave the warp at all, as there's very little oxygen out in the little warp space, and it's very, very cold. However, Steven doesn't really care about that as he tries to tell the Gems that he saw something out there, but the Gems don't really believe him. After all, in order for there to be something out there, that means someone has to be using the warp, and the only people on Earth who can use the warp are the Gems. As such, Steven, Steven does try to keep telling him, no, I saw something, but they're not exactly believing him, especially since he was sick at the time. As such, that night, Steven, it does try to get it out of his head, but he's still a little paranoid, as if there was something using the warp, maybe it'll come here. As such, Steven arms himself and is prepared for them coming, but, well, but as a result, he just kind of doesn't get a lot of sleep, and by the next morning, when the Gems see him in his tired state, they do try to convince him, no, it's fine, it's all good. No, it's fine, it's all good, there's nothing there, no one else can use them, we're all safe, it's impossible for something else to use the warp pad. However, Steven is still adamant that something went through, so the Gems, to try and appease him, do decide to bring him around to check if there's anything strange and out of the ordinary in any place on Earth there's a warp pad, and pretty much everywhere they go, things do seem normal. Hell, they even check back in with Steven Jr., the goat, and it turns out he now has a family. But no matter where they go, Steven is still adamant that he saw something, but again, with the Gem still saying it's impossible for anything on Earth to use the warp pads, to which Steven says, well, what if it's something not from off planet, or not from Earth, so to speak. As such, the Gems take Steven back to the Galaxy Warp, and, well, they do point out that none of the other warp pads work, as these are the only other warp pads that could have transported anyone off planet. But they're all broken, and Steven even marked them as broken with little stickers in the episode where they checked them. So that means that if these things are broken, nothing can be warping to Earth, which means nothing else can use the warp pads. And while Steven does concede that these things are defective and thus nobody can use them, well, he's still not backing down on this, and especially so when the Gems keep saying, no, it's important to make Steven feel safe. Yes, so Steven feels safe now, and, well, Steven just gets justifiably pissed because he doesn't like that they're telling him what he's feeling. As such, he doubles down even more that night as he just kind of sits himself down in front of the warp pad, and even Amethyst kind of walking by and telling him, yeah, we can hang out again when you stop acting crazy, and before just leaving the house. However, Steven at this point is just kind of getting tired of this and finally does concede that, fine, you know what, I'm wrong, Steven was wrong, everyone else was right. And then immediately after that, something smashes right through his roof. Steven actually starts laughing because he realizes that this is the thing that he saw in the warp pad, and this thing is an orb. Specifically, a little robot orb. Essentially, Basically, how it operates is that it's got these 4 little appendages that extend out of it and essentially, I guess, use magnetic field or something to suspend the orb body off of it. And it uses these legs to walk around, and it can shoot out this weird white goop that, when sprayed on something that's broken, it can fix it. In this case, warp pads. In this end, Steven ends up realizing this as it tries to get past him to the warp pad, and it leads to a struggle with Steven accidentally smashing it on the warp pad, which ends up damaging the machine. But as a result of this, he ends up shipping the warp pad, and this thing just sprays something off, and it's good as new. However, it immediately activates the warp pad, which Steven jumping in after it, and as they go through, Steven finds that this is not the only thing that's on Earth, as there are a lot more of these things that are filling up the warp pad, and they all begin trying to push. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Chindy knocked the tablet off the bed. Anyway, like I was saying, all of these little orb whatevers are trying to push Steven out of the warp stream. And as Steven gets his head pushed out, he can see that there is a lot more warp streams going on, and odds are they're all full of these weird little robotic orbs, and all of them are going to the same place. However, Steven really doesn't have a lot of time to revel in this, as unfortunately the orbs do manage to push him out of the stream, with Steven only managing to hold on to one. As a result of this, Steven almost dies in the warp space, so to speak, with him just holding on to this little orb, and as you can see, the frostbite starting to get to him and the lack of oxygen, he closes his eyes before a warp stream appears near him. And he's pulled inside. In this case, by Garnet. It turns out that when Steven and the little robot wound up warping away, Amethyst, who had just left, had heard it and alerted the group to what was going on. And as a result, Garnet said that Steven was in the warp stream, and pretty much Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl are coming to Steven's rescue. With Steven taking in deep breaths, and Garnet telling Steven that she was sorry that she didn't believe him, since, well, he's a crystal gem too, and his viewpoints count, and if he saw something, they should have at least taken it seriously. As a result, the gems see Steven with the orb, and Steven lets them know about how there's a bunch of these things, and they all seem to be warping to the same location. As such, the gems follow, and it turns out where they're warping to is the galaxy warp. Specifically, all these robots seem to be spraying more of this weird white goop onto the larger warp pad in the center of everything, with the one that the group has immediately going away by detaching one of its legs and just using the other 3. As such, with the goop, they manage to repair it, and the gems are immediately wondering, what the heck does this mean? Why is it doing that? And they soon get their answer as the warp pad ends up activating. As such, the gems immediately take caution as they jump off of the galaxy warp and hang off the side just out of view, and we soon see who is using the warp and who sent these little robots. It is another gem. In this case, a green gem with a triangle hairdo by the name of Peridot. And Peridot, well, we don't know what she wants. She seems to, for whatever reason, she's come to Earth, and immediately upon arriving, she ends up opening up an audio log about her talking about how she's arrived about the Earth hub, so to speak, and how she needs to go reactivate something called the Prime Kindergarten, and pretty much she seems to just be here on some kind of a mission, but we don't really know what. And as the gems are watching, well, it's not like they can go up and say hi to her, because, well, they don't know anything about her. And as we've seen with Lapis earlier, we know that not all gems are friendly, and Peridot immediately showcases that she's really not a friendly, as she sees the robot that Steven ends up damaging, which I'm just going to call it right now. They're called Robonoids. We learned this in a later episode, but I'm getting sick of calling them robots. But she sees the Robonoid that Steven wound up damaging, and instead of trying to heal it, she just crushes it beneath her foot. As a result of this, Peridot ends up going off to reactivate the kindergarten, whatever that is. But as she walks off, she happens to see the sticker that Steven left on the warp pad that she was using, and upon seeing that, Peridot is, well, justifiably cautious, because if this is here, then that means someone knows about the galaxy warp, and the site could be compromised. As a result, instead of going off to do what you want to do, she immediately warps out. She immediately uses the warp to leave before leaving an EMP that ends up shorting out all of her Robonoids. As a result of this, when the gems are when she's gone, the gems come out and just all start freaking out. With Pearl saying, "They're coming back. They're coming back. I can't do this." Amethyst saying they're dead. Steven wanting to know what the heck's going on. But Garnet says that it doesn't really matter as she goes up to the warp pad, summons one of her giant fists, summons it, makes it as big as she can, and smashes the warp pad to smithereens, stating that that Peridot is not coming back. And that's where that episode ends. So that's kind of a big thing. But before we get to talking about that big piece of plot importance, let's talk about the other episode, which I'm just gonna say right now is pretty much filler. It's emotional filler, but still filler. In this case, for the test, in this episode, Steven and the Gems are just kind of stuck at home on a rainy day playing board games. Steven ends up winning one of the games called Kitchen Calamity, which I love, I think is hilarious because apparently the rules are so complicated that none of the Gems really know how to play it, but they're just kind of rolling with it. Steven ends up winning, and so he wants to try, and as he looks through his closet of crap to see if he can find another board game to play, which leads to a lot of knockoff games, which are obviously meant to be parodies of real-world board games. As he looks through, something ends up falling out of his closet. In this case, the Moon Goddess statue from I think the third episode, but don't quote me on that. Essentially the one with the sea spire. Steven ends up seeing that, and upon seeing it, it starts causing him to go to it causes his mood to sour, so to speak. And in this, as he immediately just apologizes because, well, if he hadn't forgotten to pack this thing, then the sea spire would still be standing, and everything would have been fine. The Gems try and reassure Steven that it's fine, it's totally fine, it's not a big deal, but Steven is still remorseful. It's like, no, it was an important piece of gem architecture, and because of me, it's gone forever. And Pearl just tells Steven, oh, come on, Steven, it wasn't really that important. If it was, we wouldn't have used it to test you. And when Steven hears this, he's like, wait, what test? At which point Pearl immediately pulls a deer in the headlights look, and the Gems fess up something. So, you know that episode with the sea spire? Oh yeah, cheeseburger backpack. So you know how in that episode, the Gems decided to bring Steven along to take part in a mission? Turns out that was a test. It wasn't something they planned behind his back, they even admit that, but when Steven showed an interest in wanting to join the Gems on a mission, they, in their own words, saw an opportunity and decided to take advantage of it. In this case, what they wanted to do was they wanted to see if Steven was good for going on missions. And, well, apparently the Sea Spire, as they said, was not very crucial, was not even important. So even if their mission failed, there wouldn't be a big loss. They just wanted to see if Steven was up for actually taking on real missions instead of just staying on the sidelines like he did before. And Steven thinks that he failed. The Gems try to reassure Steven that no, he did fine. Despite the fact that he didn't bring this big thing, he still made up for it in various other areas, including with the raft and all the other resources he utilized. So he at least got a 75 on the test. He at least got a 75 on it, but Steven still isn't budging. Not helped by the fact that Pearl will not shut up, especially when she says, "Oh, that's the sea spire was in much worse shape than we thought. You should have passed that. You should have passed that easily." And Steven's just getting more and more upset. So Steven ends up demanding that the Gems test him again because, well, he's made so much progress. They could see how much he's done now. He's improved since then, and the Gems, well, somewhat reluctant, do eventually agree to Steven's terms. And what they do is that using their magic, they end up warping the interior of the temple so that essentially be Steven's testing ground. Within there are 3 rooms, each one designed by one of the Gems. All Steven has to do is get through the rooms, deal with whatever turbulations that he comes across, and eventually make it to the end where Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl are waiting. As such, Steven enters the temple happily with the Gems telling him that he'll need the Gems wishing him good luck, that he'll need it, and so we see Steven going through each of the testing rooms. And what I do like is that each room is unique and different, but also reflective of the Gems that make them. Amethyst's room is basically like an adventure dungeon, as Steven has to outrun a boulder and then jump across a gap to get to the door to the other room. The next room is essentially a music puzzle, with Steven having to figure out which pads he has to step on in order to activate the stairs, while also also dodging swinging blades, because why not? And Garnet's room is just essentially is filled with magma, spikes, and lava. And shooting lava like you would see in the Fire Temple in The Legend of Zelda. So yeah, it looks like it's all very dangerous, all very big, diabolical. It looks like something that should really test Steven's skills. Then he messes up. As while Steven is going through Garnet's room, he doesn't get out of the way of one of the falling spikes, but it doesn't crush him. In fact, the spikes actually freeze in place. And as Steven steps out of the way, then they slam down on the ground. It's then that Steven starts to notice something, as when he walks away, he steps into one of those shooting up those fire things from the floor, but the fire does not even touch Steven. No matter how he moves, no matter how he goes, the fire just seems to move around him. Now, Steven, at this point, is at the end of the room and could easily just walk through, but curiosity getting the better of him, he does end up going back through the other rooms, which I'm a little curious about, since all the previous rooms get barred when Steven finishes them. And it turns out, yeah, everything was rigged. The music room that Pearl created, literally Steven could have just tapped down on one pad and the stairs would have shown up. The pendulums would actually are just for show, as when you step in their path, they go right through you. And when Steven goes into Amethyst's room, the gap he could have jumped across could have easily been walked on, and the boulder will always just stop short of wherever Steven is. Meaning that no matter what happens, Steven would have been fine. Now, of course, when Steven learns that everything is rigged, he's justifiably pissed, and in his anger, he ends up chasing the boulder back to its resting spot, which does lead to him going outside, seeing the rooms from the outside. As such, Steven grumbles and gets angry about how the gems were not taking him seriously, he happens to overhear them talking and winds up kind of wandering over to where they are waiting for him. They don't see him because he's on top of the rooms and they're looking at the doorways. But essentially, what they're doing is they're clearly worried about Steven, because they think, well, he should be out here by now. Why hasn't he come out? Now, did he get hurt? No, he couldn't get hurt. But essentially, the conversation eventually boils down to how the gems are worried and they're afraid that they're not doing a good job with him. Like, he's made so much progress. He can make Rose's bubble. He's summoned her shield at least twice, but at the same time, he's also lost his healing powers because he lost confidence in himself. And as a result of this, the gems are kind of doing this not just because they want Steven's mood to improve, but because they don't want him to have another setback. If he doubts himself again, things could just go wrong, and things could go wrong, and he could lose more abilities. They're trying to give him that edge, and as a result, and this leads to Amethyst just saying, "We're bad at this. We don't know. Pearl can't control him. He shouldn't be listening to Amethyst." And then even Garnet admits that they don't know what they're doing. There's never been anyone like Steven, and they have no idea if what they're doing is actually helping him or I'm just hurting him in the long run. As such, when Steven hears this, instead of going out and confronting them, he instead goes back to the first room and then just walks through all three rooms, not even bothering to deal with any of the puzzles and tribulations. As such, he eventually reaches the end of Garnet's room and sees the gems as the platform they're on suddenly lights up with "Congratulations, Steven," and they're clapping for him, saying "Great job." And Steven just kind of seems to walk up to them, determined, and look like he's about to chew them out, before he says that was amazing, and complimenting them on how awesome these things were, that they did a great job, and how ultimately he thinks they're amazing, and he's lucky to have them, which prompts the gems to just kind of blush, smile, and all three of them give Steven a hug, which is a sweet little thing, and that's how the episode ends. So, okay, so as per usual, let's talk about my thoughts, and of course, let's get to Warp Tour first. This one is a very nice plot important episode, and before I get to my thoughts on what led up to the plot important episode, let's talk about the important plot point in itself. In this case, we're getting more into the gems' history, so to speak. We got that a little bit in previous episodes when Lapis Lazuli was introduced, but that was just a little bit at best. How that introduced everything was by establishing that the gems may not always be the good guys when it comes to these things, that there is more to the story than meets the eye, especially when you learn the monsters they were fighting are actually corrupted gems. And in the case of Lapis, she was essentially a prisoner because, well, she just was trapped in a mirror for thousands of years and the gems did nothing. And so, but now we are getting more into the gems history as we're once again introduced, and that's history is once again introduced through another character. In this case, Peridot, which I'll just explain my thoughts on Peridot right now. I like her initial intro. What I like about her is that I like how bright. I think one thing I can say, I like how bright green she is. It just kind of sticks out and definitely catches your eye immediately. And her design definitely makes you look like someone studious. Her outfit is just kind of a basic uniform with like a V shape on around the neck. Her arms we got her triangle hair, which definitely is striking and eye catching. But what also makes her look kind of more like a brainiac is that she has a visor similar to Garnet. But whereas Garnet's is just completely opaque, so you can't see her eyes. These ones are kind of like see-through, kind of like, I guess you could say, nerd glasses, so to speak. Definitely doesn't make her look more studious, and to help add to that are her limbs, as she has these strange robotic limbs on her that are on her arms and legs. And what these help not only showcase her as a scientific sort, but also kind of looking a bit more alien, very much unlike how we've seen gems before. Because while the gems clearly aren't human, at the same time there is still some bit of humanity in them, at least in their designs. Even Lapis Lazuli, who had all that ungodly power with her aquakinesis, still kind of looked like a human, considering that her outfit was essentially a tank top and a skirt. But in this case, we see one that looks a lot more in Peridot's case, she looks a lot more sterile, a lot more distant. She definitely looks like just an officer. She definitely looks like an officer, a scientific officer who's really just there to do her job and nothing more. When we even see her, she doesn't really look like, oh cool, we're here. She's just like, yep, I'm in. Let's go do her job. And the only time she seems to show any kind of concern is when she learns that the galaxy warp may have been compromised and she just bails, which again is a smart thing to do. If there's an enemy nearby that could ultimately sabotage your mission, you don't want to go in blind. So as a result, she has to essentially do a tactical retreat at the first sign that something's not right, which I think is nice and studious and definitely showcases a very forward-thinking logic. Another sign that she's smart and definitely thinks things through, not through an emotional standpoint, but through a scientific standpoint, or just kind of a basic chain of logic, which I do like. And her presence does hint that there's something going on. After all, she came to Earth for a reason, and while the gems don't really want to know what that reason is, since they immediately smashed the warp pad that she used to get to Earth, at the same time, she was there for something, and they need to figure out what. Because after all, she sent a bunch of Robonoids to Earth to try and fix this warp pad. But what was the point? What was the reason for this? We don't know, but we're ready to find out. So I like that, and I love seeing the way, and I like how she looks, and that definitely gives you the air that something's a bit up here. But at the same time, that's just the end of the episode. For the rest of the episode, I do like the build-up also. And the build-up, I think, is really well done, because it does kind of help showcase more of Steven's dynamic with the group as, well, the junior member, so to speak. Something I like about the show is that while Steven is treated as a member of the team, he's also still treated like the kid of the group. The gems are still technically Steven's legal guardians, so they are mostly concerned with just trying to keep Steven safe and and constantly teaching him. They're the ones that are supposed to be on top of things. And while Steven has suggested various options in the past, and those options have paid off, at the end of the day, there have always been a certain air of caution when doing those things. And when you actually think about it in previous episodes, the gems tend to push Steven back whenever there's a major threat. They always have him be like behind them, or they push him aside, and Steven kind of has to force his way in. We've seen that before in previous episodes. With the episode Centipedal, when things started going wrong with her, they pushed him back and immediately treated Centipedal like a threat, and Steven kind of had to force the issue in order to get Centipedal to back down. And likewise with the Watermelon Stevens, while Steven was aware that they were probably going to only attack the gems if they thought they were threats, the gems still pushed Steven back anyway and went to go fight them. In this case, they were pretty much disregarding Steven's words, because they thought, no, we know best right now. go and take care. Now that doesn't mean they're jerks to Steven, because they do still care about him, and when he did get things right, they still treat him with respect. But in this case, because he saw something and they didn't, they just disregard what he's saying, especially since it kind of spits in the face of what they think they know is fact. In this case, that nobody else can use the warp pads but them, because, after all, they're all broken. And if what Garnet did is anything to go by, they're broken for a reason. As a result of this, it does help showcase kind of more of Steven's dynamic, and by the end, it's not Steven who learns the lesson, because Steven is very determined, and he does not back down throughout all this. Even when the gems keep showing the face, there's no one here, drop it. He does not drop it because he knows he saw something, and he does have justified concern, and he is trying to look into it. He knows that he saw something out there, but the fact that he's not finding any clues is still causing him worry. After all, where did it come from? What is this thing? Nobody else can use the warp pads on Earth but the gems. So how was this thing using it? And when he finally gets his answer, yeah, he's excited, but at the same time, he also knows that it needs to be investigated, especially when the things almost kill him. And by the end, like I said, it's the gems that learn the lesson. With Garnet actually telling Steven, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. You're a crystal gem too. Which I like. It's the gems actually acknowledging they should have actually taken his word for it. Yes, he's the junior member, but he's still a member. And if there's something if there's something to be concerned about, they probably should take it seriously. Which I like. I do like that. And by the end, I do like that Garnet does admit that they were in the wrong, and that what Steven was worried about in the end was something that they should have been justifiably worried about. I like that, and I do like the tension that builds up because of it as Steven keeps pushing the issue, but the gems keep trying to brush it aside. And so as such, when everything does finally come to head, and Steven and the group realizes that Steven was right, yeah, they do justify. They are ready to investigate it, and like I said, they're ready to apologize. So I like that. I like that a lot. It's a good plot. It has good tension, especially especially since you don't see anything and you begin questioning what's going on as well. And the ultimate reveal with Peridorrito and laying down future plot threads for later episodes. I think it's good. So yeah. But to kind of weigh down that plot point episode, we also have a filler episode. In this case, this episode really is just here for character stuff. And what I like, in this case, it furthers along the dynamic with Steven and the gems. And like in the last episode where the gems had to learn the lesson, in this case, what's going on, how things are going along isn't with Steven, but with the gems themselves. And I know that sounds like how I just said that sounds kind of muddled, but what I mean is, it's not Steven that has to go through the journey. It's him having to give the gem. It's him giving the gem something. The case in point, Steven in the beginning of this episode wants to go through these tests because, well, he's trying to prove that he's come a long way. He's trying to prove something to the gems because he genuinely wants to show them, I've made progress. And yeah, that when I screwed up this one mission, it might have been, yes, I screwed up this one mission, but I've come a long way. Even the gems say that. And yeah, I do like that Steven is pushing this because he realizes he quote unquote failed his test, which I do like that is a point of contention with him, that while he has kind of moved past it, he does still regret how things ended there. But at the same time, when Steven does push it, yeah, he is kind of angry that the gems rigged everything so that he couldn't get hurt. Which, you know what, the more I think about it, good on them. I did initially get annoyed as well because Steven did want to be tested and taken seriously. At the same time, he's still a kid, and while the gems may want him to kind of get stronger, they don't want to kill him. They just want him to get a boost in confidence. So, it makes sense why they kind of would rig it as they did. But at the same time, that's one of the things that I do genuinely like. That they're the ones that Steven ends up giving the pep up to. As Steven, well, again, when Steven learns that all three tests are rigged, he's justifiably angry. But then when he actually overhears the gems lamenting how they have no idea what they're doing, they don't know how things are going, that at the end of the day they're trying to get his confidence up because he has made so much progress, and if he loses that confidence again, it could lead to him backtracking. I do like that. At the end, Steven realizes they need this a lot more than I do. They need to know that they're doing a good job. And Steven obliges because he does believe they're doing a good job. He gives them the boosting confidence rather than them giving him that. And it's sweet. It's really nice seeing Steven just actually going up to the gems and saying, "You're doing a good job and I treasure you guys a lot." It's nice and it's just wholesome, and it helps showcase that at the end of the day, it's not the gems support not it's not just the gems supporting Steven, it's Steven supporting them. And it kind of helps showcase that they love each other, that they're family. They'll do anything. They'll do whatever they can to help each other. And in this case, the gems put all this together to help boost Steven's confidence. And when Steven learned it was all rigged, he just played along with it and pretended that and said it was this is really good and thank you for doing this for me. Help boost their confidence and help showcase to them they're doing a good job and he appreciates them a lot. I like that. It's sweet. It's precious, and I can't get enough of it. On top of that, and even then, prior to the reveal of the tests were rigged, I do like seeing Steven actually putting his best foot forward. Yeah, he may have pushed this, and it kind of may have just been him trying to prove to the gems, and maybe himself, that he is good enough, but if he didn't know that they were rigged, he probably could have gotten through them. It wasn't until at the very end when he finally learned the truth. Otherwise, he did seem to be doing a good job up to that point. He was able to, he actually did seem to get away from the boulder just in time, though you could argue that maybe at the very end it stopped because it was almost an inch away. But he seemed to actually be doing a good job. He actually did pay attention to the musical patterns with Pearl's puzzle, which allowed him to get through and even properly dodge the pendulums. And even in the end, if it wasn't for that spike, for the spikes that quote unquote almost crushed Steven, he probably would have gotten through without realizing anything was rigged. I like that. It did showcase that Steven was smart and actually did take these tests seriously and not just as something that he had to do to look cool. He actually was taking them seriously and was putting his best foot forward for them. I like that. So that's a nice little thing, and seeing Steven go through that was nice, especially like the variety in the tests, which, like I said, they reflected each gem's personality well with them. But so I think that's really good. But overall, I think both episodes are still really good. Warp Tour, I think, is nice in helping lay the foundation for future episodes, while also showcasing more of Steven as a character growing, especially since he wasn't just folding on it and kept pushing it to the point where he was proven right, and he didn't actually, and what I do like, he didn't rub it in anyone's face. He was just glad he was right, and when everyone realized he was, they just properly investigated. I liked the little thing with the gems apologizing to Steven, and they promised to take him seriously. And the test, I do like just seeing Steven and the gems just kind of going to all the lengths they do just to try and make the other ones feel better and confident about themselves. It's sweet, nice, very familial, very just hits that nice sweet spot right here. And overall, it's just nice. I like it. Both episodes are nice, and both episodes do well in having everybody showcase that just how much that they genuinely do care and love each other. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you next week. Take care.